Okay, so personality disorders are super interesting. Unfortunately, there's a lot of them, and we don't have time to talk about all of them. I am going to mention a little bit about each, and then focus on the most popular ones and the ones that are most diagnosed. So, personality disorders are related to long-standing personality traits. So, these are disorders that are inflexible, maladaptive, distressful, and extremely resistant to change. So this is part of someone's personality. It's part of who they are. So these are really hard disorders to treat. And all personality disorders are characterized by patterns of disrupted relationships, patterns of problem behavior, negative life outcomes, consistent problems across time and situation, so they don't learn from their past behaviors. So they continue to act the way that they have acted before, even though it turned out negatively. Um, Marked effects on others. So it might not, their disorder might not affect them so much, but it definitely affects others in their lives. And they are highly resistant to change. It's who they are, it's their personality, so it's very hard for them to change. And there are 10 personality disorders that you can think of in 3 different clusters. The first cluster you can consider the odd cluster, which has paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal. And then the second cluster can be considered the dramatic cluster. And this has histrionic, narcissistic, borderline, and antisocial. These two are bolded because borderline and antisocial are the ones we're going to be talking about more in depth, since these are the 2 more popular personality disorders that are diagnosed the most. And then cluster 3 is the anxious cluster. So this consists of avoidant personality, dependent personality, and obsessive compulsive personality, which is different from OCD. So, to have a personality disorder, you must be at least 18 years old to be diagnosed. They don't diagnose people younger than 18 with personality disorders because they still think that they're children and their personality still may be developing. And these disorders are very prone to misdiagnosis for many reasons. It's because they're less well defined. They're harder to pin down, really. And the people with these disorders often don't think they have a problem. So they often don't even seek help. It's usually the other people in their life that are affected by their disorder rather than themselves. They don't see a problem in how they act. And this require and in it for a therapist to identify a personality disorder correctly, it requires long periods of time to look for patterns of behavior. Because this is who they are. This is not a single episode of something that they just did because they felt a certain way. It's because that's their personality, that's who they are, who they've been. So they need to look at them for a long period of time. And these personality disorders are not mutually exclusive, not with each other and not with other disorders. You can have both borderline disorder and antisocial disorder. You can have antisocial disorder and narcissistic disorder. You can have borderline disorder and bipolar disorder. Actually, all 3 of those that I've just listed are common dual diagnoses. And all of these characteristics occur on a continuum. So they have defined certain characteristics for each personality disorder. This graph has only graphed a few personality disorders, but as you can see, borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder overlap with a couple of their characteristics. And then narcissistic and antisocial have all of the antagonism traits. And then the avoidant shares both with the schizotypal and borderline. So it can be kind of hard to determine which one fits best, or if they have both. So let's look at the odd cluster briefly. So you don't need to know super detail about these. I have underlined the gists of what you need to know. The paranoid personality disorder consists of major distrust and suspicion of others and their motives. So they are always paranoid that others are going to stab them in the back or try and harm them. They have this unjustified belief that others are going to try and harm them. And they tend to hold grudges, and they also tend to perceive non-threatening remarks from others as insults or attacks. And when they perceive things as an insult or attack, they react very aggressively to that. Then there's schizoid. This type of personality disorder is when someone has a complete and total lack of interest in social relationships. They always prefer being alone. And they do not ever want to socialize. And on top of that, they have a limited range of emotional expression. They really don't express emotion much at all. And they really don't find most activities pleasurable, and they really have a trouble picking up social cues. Schizotypal, this is where they have a very peculiar way of thinking and behaving. So they might be dressed weird, and they might think weird, they might talk weird, have weird beliefs, and they have odd perceptions. They have very different perceptual experiences than most people. And what's interesting about it is they have either flat emotions or inappropriate emotional responses. And they can have magical thinking, which is they think that they can control certain things with their thoughts, and they can sometimes believe that some casual events have hidden meanings just for them. Then there's the anxious cluster. There's avoidant. So people who are avoidant are overly sensitive to criticism and rejection. They feel very inadequate, inferior, and unattractive. They're very socially inhibited, timid, and isolated. They're extremely shy and avoid activities requiring interpersonal contact. So this is similar to social phobia, but the thing is, this is their personality. You can treat social phobia. This is much harder to treat if it's a personality disorder. Then there's dependent. These people are very submissive, and they always require excessive approval and reassurance and advice. They need people to make sure that they're doing the right thing. They need to make sure that whatever they're doing is right by someone else. And they tend to cling on to another person and desperately fear losing them. They really they become dependent on others that they have relationships with. And they lack self-confidence and are extremely uncomfortable when they're alone. Then there's obsessive compulsive. These people are preoccupied with details and orderliness. They are extreme perfectionists, and they get majorly distressed when perfection is not achieved. So their desire their biggest desire is to be in control of people, tasks, and situations because they want to strive for perfection. And they often have their own set of rules for life, but get really upset when others break them, even if the other people that break them don't know about their rules. But they are so preoccupied with rules that they get very angry when someone doesn't follow along with whatever they think is right. Then there's the dramatic cluster. There's histrionic personality disorder. So these are people who are constantly seeking attention. These are people that have to be the center of attention always. They are excessively emotional, dramatic, or sexually provocative in order to gain attention. They often speak dramatically with really strong opinions, but often don't have many facts to back up their really strong opinions. They have really strong emotions, but they're usually really, really shallow emotions. And they have a really, really excessive concern for their physical appearance. Since they want attention, they want to look good as well, because they want all eyes on them. Then there's narcissistic personality disorder. This is when someone believes that they are more important or more special than others. And people with this disorder tend to exaggerate their achievements and their talents. They tend to make claims that they've done more than they really have, or that they are smarter than they are, or that they have more skills than they really do, or they are better at the skills that they have than they really are. They often have arrogance, a lot of arrogance, but it is possible for narcissistic personality disorder people to have a delicate ego, to have a little bit of self-esteem issues, because they need constant praise and admiration. They need that from people. And that fuels their belief that they are important and special. And since they are kind of wrapped up in themselves, they really only really think about themselves. They fail to recognize others' needs and feelings. And then there's borderline and antisocial personality disorders that we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth. So, borderline personality disorder is a pattern of intense and unstable personal relationships, intense emotions, poor self-image, and impulsivity. It can often be described as someone who self-sabotages personal relationships. And they may have multiple suicide attempts or self-injury. May have multiple episodes of self-injury throughout their life. So why this is the case of the self-sabotaging and unstable relationships is because they have two really opposing ideas in their head. They have this complete distrust of others, but this total fear of abandonment. So they really need others in their life, but they don't trust them. They think they're going to leave. So they go to very great lengths to avoid being abandoned, and oftentimes this can lead to them threatening or attempting suicide in order for someone to stick around. And they may display inappropriate and intense bouts of anger. This could be prompted by something or not. Oftentimes, their really negative thoughts are stress-induced, but they're not always. And they have ongoing feelings of emptiness. And this tends to be more common in men than women. So what I mean by the opposing things is they have totally two completely different opposing thoughts going on. And it's known as splitting. It's all or none thinking, black and white. So they will, if they start, say, a person, this is a classic example. So a girl meets a guy, they start dating, and she is like, he's the one, I am in love, he's the one, he's all she can talk about, constantly. That's, to her friends, that's all she can say, is all about him, all about how they're gonna get married, all about how he's the one, and they just met, by the way. Like, it's very 100% good, and this lasts for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, they stop talking about this person. And maybe a friend asks about the guy, and the person goes, oh, he's a loser, we're not going to talk about him. So it goes from 100% good to 100% bad. And this is different from bipolar because it's not mood, it's thought. It is common for borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder to occur at the same time, especially if you have borderline personality disorder. You can have bipolar disorder without borderline personality disorder and vice versa, but they can often happen together. Then there's antisocial personality disorder. This is when someone has a disregard for or violation of rights of others by 3 or more of the following things. So, repeated unlawful acts, deceit, lying, using aliases, conning others, impulsivity, failing to plan ahead, being irritable or aggressive, reckless disregard for safety of self or others, consistent irresponsibility, and lack of remorse after antisocial behavior. So they do not feel sorry after they do any of these things, after they violate any rights of others. They are very manipulative people, and if you've ever heard the term psychopath or sociopath, those terms are referring to antisocial personality disorder. Technically, psychopath and sociopath do mean different things, but for this lecture, we're going to just say that they are the same thing, and antisocial personality disorder does envelop both of them. And this disorder is more common in men than women. And what's really interesting is that some individuals are very charming and intelligent, which makes them extremely manipulative, and they are considered very high functioning. So, the risk factors for antisocial personality disorder are biology and genetics, low socioeconomic status and environment, oftentimes how someone grew up is people with antisocial personality disorder often have similar upbringings of toxic home lives, and there's often a family history of dysfunction, so some sort of not good family life, or there is some sort of psychopathy, some sort of psychological disorders within the family. It doesn't necessarily have to be antisocial personality disorder. It could be schizophrenia, it could be another personality disorder, a mood disorder, something else, but yeah, there's usually some sort of family history going on. And then, usually they show signs as a kid, and there are 3 signs that are called the psychopathic trio. And these are enuresis, which is bedwetting. If a child wets the bed an excessive amount, after they have successfully potty trained. So they know how to use the bathroom, but they wet the bed a lot anyways. If they set a lot of fires as a kid, if they are really into fires, that is a trait of the psychopathic trio. And cruelty to animals. If they are really mean to animals or kill a lot of animals, that's a really big indicator that they may have something wrong. And conduct disorder is also a risk factor and an indication that antisocial personality disorder may be a thing. So conduct disorder is actually only a disorder given to children or teenagers, and it is defined as habitually violating the rights of others and not conforming their behavior to the law or social norms appropriate for their age. So it's similar to antisocial personality disorder, but it's like a child version of it. So, antisocial personality disorder does share a link with violent crime. Many serial killers have been diagnosed with this disorder, including Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, and Charles Manson. And many of these serial killers share similar traits, such as antisocial personality disorder, a troublesome childhood, and distorted and or violent views towards women or sexuality. So Ted Bundy is a very good example of antisocial personality disorder. He is responsible for around 30 murders in 4 different states. I say around 30 because that's the amount that he confessed to. It could be more or less than that, and we don't truly know. He is extremely high functioning. Was. He's not alive. He was extremely high functioning and charming. Many people described him as handsome and polite, and this is often how he lured women. Like, he used his charm and his good looks to get women to come with him to his car and abduct them. And he actually was a law student. He blended into society very well. His first murder was triggered by an ex-lover of his, and all of the murders after that, including that one, were sexually driven. And he had a troublesome childhood. His mother was very young when he was born, so he was raised by his grandfather and grew up believing that his mom was his sister. He eventually found that out, but we're not really totally sure when. And he claimed that his grandfather was hostile and abusive. And they say that he was a well-behaved child, but lacked interpersonal skills and was bullied because of that. And problem behaviors didn't show up until adolescence. Then there's Charles Manson. He never actually killed anyone himself. He's an interesting case. Instead, he led a cult called the Manson family. And he had a high influence on the family. And to help with this influence, he gave them a lot of drugs and talked to them about a lot of ideas, put a lot of ideas in their heads. And the members of the family committed 9 murders in 4 different places. And he thought that there was a race war coming. Charles Manson, from the song Helter Skelter from the Beatles, translated that into an apocalyptic race war was going to happen. And him and his Manson family were trying to start it. We're trying to start the race war for the black people. And they did this by writing pig and pigs in the blood of their victims on the walls. He also had a troublesome childhood. He came from poverty and neglect. When his mother was around, she was an alcoholic and didn't pay much attention to him. But she was in jail for a good chunk of his childhood for trying robbery. And he started to commit theft himself at the age of 9. So he also had some criminal behavior in his past well before the Manson family. And this is a real quote from Charles Manson. He has a very interesting way of thinking and talking, and this kind of gives some insight as to how he became a cult leader. So these children that came at you with knives, they're your children. You taught them. I just tried to help them stand up. Most of the people at the ranch that you call the family were just people that you did not want. So he is not admitting any fault. He thinks that he has not done any wrong. He is accusing other people. And here's a good video of an actual clips of him in an interview.
The conversation lasted an hour and a half, during which Manson was sometimes lucid, sometimes incoherent, and frequently manipulative. From your words, as Mr. Emmons quotes them in this book, it's clear that you were guilty of murder, and yet he says in all his conversations with you, he never heard you express remorse. Have you never felt it?
Remorse for what? You people have done everything in the world to me. Doesn't that give me equal right? I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to, because that's what you've done to me. If you spit in my face and smack me in the mouth and throw me in solitary confinement for nothing, what do you think's going to happen when I get out of here? Guilty. I wouldn't do anything that I felt guilty about.
You don't feel guilty at all.
There's no need to feel guilty. I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of. Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something. You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. It'd be just like walking to the drugstore. Do you feel blame? Are you mad? Do you feel like most about blood vanish? Get vanish. Get a vanish. And I am incompetent. I'm definitely incompetent. I say that. I say that. There's nothing wrong with being incompetent because you don't have to do as much. If you're competent, then you got a lot to do.
You write that in all your conversations with Charles Manson, he never expressed remorse.
Perhaps he did. I mean, perhaps he did. He's guilty in his own mind. He's not guilty. You guys got you stuck in your head that I murdered somebody. You've got it stuck in your brain that I murdered somebody. What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it.
Very interesting man, that Charles Manson. So, the good news is, not everyone with antisocial personality disorder will necessarily become a criminal, violent, or a murderer. Actually, some psychopaths learn to function in society fairly successfully. They can have really high-level careers, but unfortunately they still often have manipulative and temporary relationships due to the nature of who they are. This is a list of professions with the most psychopaths. I'm going to start at number 10, and we're going to work up to number 1 with the most psychopaths. So number 10 is a civil servant. Number 9 is a chef. 8 is a clergy person. 7 is a police officer. 6 is a journalist. 5 is a surgeon. 4 is a salesperson. 3 is media, like in TV or radio. 2 is a lawyer. That was what Ted Bundy wanted to be. And number 1 is CEO. So why do these jobs have the most psychopaths? Well, because these roles offer power, and they often require emotionless decisions. So when you're a CEO, you often have to make really tough decisions. You often have to fire a lot of people. You have to make budget cuts. You have to unfortunately ruin a lot of people's lives to get ahead. And psychopaths are very good at doing that. And lawyers, certain types of lawyers, have to work to get a guilty person free. And they have to be okay with that. Surgeons, they operate on people, and to get around the emotional turmoil of cutting someone open and then potentially dying, psychopaths can make it really easy by just seeing them as a piece of meat, or a machine that they're working on. Professions with the least number of psychopaths include an accountant, a doctor, a creative artist, a teacher, a charity worker, a beautician or stylist, a craftsperson, a therapist, a nurse, or care aide. Care aide number 1. So nurse and care aide are number 1 here. So why are this least psychopaths? Because these roles don't offer much power, and they require human connection. They require dealing with humans and their feelings, and talking to humans and caring for them. And it's interesting to note that here, doctor is on least psychopaths, but surgeon is on most. That's because doctors do more medical work, they do medicine, and they talk to the people. Surgeons don't talk to their patients. Patients are usually anesthetized when surgeons see them. They are usually not conscious. But doctors usually have their patients awake and have to talk to them.